honest balance scale, honest weights, an honest bushel dry measure, and an honest gallon liquid measure. I am Adonai your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Observe all my regulations and rulings and do them. I am Adonai. Chapter 19 is the general definition of how holiness should be manifested in the life of a person set apart for holiness. In the Old Testament, those persons were Israel. In the New Testament, those persons are those who have come into union with Messiah, Yeshua. Now, we can have legitimate arguments, debates, over whether or not we're to follow to the letter, in the same kind of cultural setting, all of the 613 laws and regulations set before us in the Torah. But what is not arguable is that the principle and pattern of what was holy in 13 or 1400 BC, when the Torah was first given to Moses, is the same as it is today. Holiness has not changed. I want to quote for you a brief passage of an essay written by Joseph Hertz, who was the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations during the time leading up to and during World War II. And he says this about Leviticus 19 in general, about holiness specifically. He says this: developing the idea of holiness as order and not confusion. This list, the verses of Leviticus 19, upholds rectitude and straight dealing as holy, and contradiction and double dealing as against holiness. Theft, lying, false witness, cheating in weights and measures, all kinds of dissembling, such as speaking ill of the deaf and presumably smiling to their faces. Hating your brother in your heart while speaking kindly to him. These are clearly contradictions between what seems and what is. Or as Professor Gordon Wenham says, holiness is expressed in moral integrity, which in turn is expressed by physical wholeness. Let me put it to you another way. Don't talk to me about the Holy One, Yeshua, living in your heart at the same moment you're denying the need to live a holy life. Don't tell me that you can have the Spirit of God dwelling in you, but you see no obedience, no need to be obedience to Him, to show any obedience to Him at all. That obedience is a thing of the past. And what is God's Torah but the spelling out of what we call morality? Morality is what is good, separated from everything that's not. I'm not saying that we are necessarily to act out these laws established in the ancient Middle Eastern cultural context in exactly the same way they were acted out 3,000 years ago. But some things should be, and other things can be brought forward as intact as possible, the biblical feasts, for example. But the definition of what is moral, what is not, was set down by God. It doesn't matter about inherent cultural barriers. And so these principles shouldn't be altered by man. It's interesting that Rabbi Hertz sees one of the primary defining attributes of holiness as order. Again, as defined by God, not by man. As opposed to chaos, confusion. Because last week, when we were looking at the first part of Leviticus 18, we saw that the sin of bestiality, having sex with humans, was wrong because it was tevel. It was an act of confusion, of improper mixing. We're going to stop and look at a couple of instances in Leviticus 19 where confusion is the issue. And it takes on some very interesting and I think quite profound applications. After this introduction to Leviticus 19, and after the general command to be holy because I'm holy, we get reminded of two of the Ten Commandments of Mount Sinai. In verse 4, Israel is told they shall revere their father and mother, and they shall keep my Sabbaths. What is it about one's father and mother that's so important to God? They gave you life, at least in a physical sense. They were given the responsibility to be an authority over you in order to train you up. From a spiritual viewpoint, it's similar to our relationship with Jehovah. He gave us life, so we are to recognize His authority over us. This is the reality of duality in action once again. This principle is true in both the physical realm and in the spiritual realm simultaneously. And of course, here we find another reference to Sabbath observance, put front and center. Keeping the Sabbath was a key part of God's plan for those who trust Him. Not as part of salvation, but as obedience. As with anything God ordains, Sabbath could be made into a burden and into a works-based legal exercise. And in fact, Sabbath did become one of the most argued points of contention among the Jews. Not whether or not it ought to be observed, not even when it ought to be observed. Rather, the disagreements were over the details of how to properly observe Sabbath. I'm not going to get into a spiel with you today about Shabbat being the seventh day of the week and only the seventh day, Saturday in our modern terminology, even though it's so. What I want to point out is that Sabbath is one of those moral choices that God lays out for us. If you attended my lesson in Genesis 6, we explored the source of evil and why and how it exists. If you did, then the idea of Sabbath being a moral choice is a lot easier to grasp. For those who didn't hear it, it might be good if you obtained the CD or listened to it on our website. But in a nutshell, the concept is that our will is that part of us that's put there by God for the purpose of making moral choices. That's the point of our will. Will is not about preferences. Ice cream flavors, your favorite deodorant soap. God allows men many preferences that are inherently neither right nor wrong. But the choice of the will is always about right and wrong, good and evil, obedience or disobedience. In the same way, Sabbath is not about preference. How one observes Sabbath, exactly what you eat, what you wear, how you observe it. Do you light candles? What prayers do you recite during it? These things are a matter of preference. As it's made clear by Paul in Colossians 2:16, let no one disquiet you about food and drink, distinctions of festivals, new moons, Sabbaths. God's Sabbaths and His new moons were no more abolished than were food and drink. So along with Sabbath, what we should begin to ponder is this. Since our wills make moral choices, therefore the choice is always for God or against God. And since God makes clear just what defines for God and against God, that indeed disobedience amounts to nothing less than a moral choice of our wills to go against God. That's what disobedience is. But also notice that there is some kind of connection made between honoring one's parents and Sabbath keeping. Not only are they the first things mentioned after the instruction to be holy as Jehovah is holy, but it's in the same sentence and they're connected. This did not escape the eye of the great rabbis, because this particular sentence structure is intended to show there is a linkage between these two commandments. It was demonstrating that even as honoring our parents stands as a priority number one among human duties, humans to human interaction, the very first step among our duties to God, and therefore towards becoming holy, is to sanctify and observe the Sabbath in our lives. That's our number one duty. We have to set it apart in our lives, just as God sanctified the seventh day Shabbat at the beginning of the world. That's why they're linked. We're going to continue chapter 19 the next time we meet. Father God, thank you for giving us all this. Thank you that when you give us an instruction to be holy, you show us what holiness is. When you tell us we need to be redeemed, you show us redeemed from what? And then you provide the Redeemer. Father, you tell us that we need to be clean before you. So you tell us what uncleanness is and what cleanness is in your eyes. Lord, the only choice we have to make is to do it or not do it, to believe it or not believe it, to look at that will that you gave us, and within that will make that moral choice. Shall we be obedient to God or shall we not? It comes down to that. Father, I pray that all of us present here today would make the choice to uphold you, your laws and commandments, and to live our lives in obedience to you. Now send us out today, Father, in joy.